never told my fiancé I was a Navy admiral. He thought I spent my days filing paperwork in a government office. The night he invited me to Christmas dinner with his parents, I wore my oldest coat on purpose. I wanted to know whether they would welcome me because I loved their son, or judge me because they believed I had nothing. Halfway through dinner, they slid a contract across the table and smiled. A minute later, my secure phone rang. The voice on the other end said 5 words that turned every face in that dining room white. "Admiral Marlowe, we're waiting, ma'am." People assume a uniform is what earns respect. After 23 years in the United States Navy, I had learned something very different. A uniform only reveals who you are. Character reveals who everyone else is. My name is Vivienne Marlowe. I'm 40 years old, and for the last 3 years I've served as a Rear Admiral in the United States Navy. Very few people outside military circles knew that. I preferred it that way. My neighbors believed I worked for the federal government in Washington. They weren't entirely wrong. My dry cleaner thought I was an accountant because I usually picked up my clothes after office hours. The elderly woman who lived across the street often asked whether my boss appreciated how organized I was. I always smiled and answered, "I hope so." The truth never seemed necessary. Power loses something when it constantly announces itself. I had spent too many years serving beside sailors who understood that the strongest leaders rarely introduced themselves by rank. Then I met Calder Whitcomb. He was 43, kind-eyed patient, and possessed the kind of quiet humor that never demanded attention. We met by accident in Annapolis. My car had refused to start after an unusually long meeting at the Naval Academy. Calder happened to park beside me and offered jumper cables before I even asked. He didn't recognize me. That alone felt refreshing. He wore faded jeans, an old leather jacket, and apologized twice for getting grease on his sleeves while helping. "You deserve dinner after this," he joked. "I think I deserve a functioning battery first." He laughed so hard he nearly dropped the cables. Our first date wasn't glamorous. We ate crab cakes at a little waterfront restaurant where nobody cared who anyone was. He talked about architecture. I talked carefully about government administration. It wasn't exactly a lie. Most of my days involved meetings, planning budgets, personnel decisions, and paperwork that could fill entire rooms. He simply assumed I worked behind a desk. I never corrected him. Not because I wanted to deceive him, because I wanted to know me without the title. The first 6 months felt effortless. Calder never asked how much money I made. He never questioned why my schedule occasionally changed overnight. Whenever I disappeared for several days, I simply said I had government travel. He nodded. "Sounds exhausting." "It usually is." He never pushed further. That trust meant everything, or at least I believed it did. When he proposed 18 months later beside the Chesapeake Bay, I said yes before he'd even finished asking. The ring wasn't enormous. It didn't need to be. He looked terrified. "I know I'm not perfect." "I know. I talk too much." "You do." "I leave coffee mugs everywhere." "You absolutely do." "But I promise I'll never stop choosing you." That was the sentence that made me cry. Not because it was poetic, because it sounded sincere. For months afterward, I pictured holidays together. Grandchildren someday. A quiet retirement near the water. The ordinary future military families rarely get to imagine. Then December arrived. "My parents want to host Christmas dinner," Calder said one evening while we decorated my townhouse. He hesitated before hanging another ornament. "I've actually never brought anyone home that mattered." I looked at him. "That mattered. You know what I mean." "No." He sighed. "My parents can be difficult." "Difficult how? They're traditional." I smiled. "I've negotiated with 4-star admirals." His expression softened. "I somehow think my mother might be tougher." I laughed. "I'll survive." He didn't laugh with me. Instead, he stared at the Christmas lights reflecting in the window. "I just need one favor." "What?" "Don't take anything personally." Those words stayed with me much longer than they should have. Over the following week, little details began bothering me. Whenever I mentioned meeting his parents, Calder changed the subject. He seemed unusually nervous. Twice I caught him typing long messages before quickly locking his phone when I walked into the room. Then 2 days before Christmas, I overheard the end of a phone conversation. "No, she's very simple." Silence. "I know." Another pause. "No, she's definitely not after money." My footsteps must have alerted him. He turned immediately. His smile appeared a fraction too quickly. "Work call." "Yeah." Something inside me shifted. Not suspicion. Instinct. Military service teaches you to notice tiny inconsistencies. A delayed answer. An unnatural smile. A sentence that arrives half a second too late. They rarely prove guilt, but they always deserve attention. I didn't ask what he meant by simple. Instead, I quietly began preparing for Christmas dinner. When I opened my closet on Christmas Eve, two very different versions of my life stared back at me. On one side hung elegant dresses suitable for diplomatic receptions, designer coats, pearl earrings given to me after my promotion ceremony. On the opposite side rested clothes I wore around the house, a worn navy coat I'd owned for nearly 12 years, comfortable boots, an old knitted scarf. I reached for the old coat, not because I wanted to look poor, because I wanted to disappear. If Calder's family believed I was merely an office clerk, then they would meet exactly that woman. No expensive jewelry, no luxury handbag, no subtle hints of influence. Just Vivian, the woman Calder claimed to love. I tied my hair into a simple ponytail. Minimal makeup, plain silver earrings. When I looked in the mirror, I saw the version of myself that wandered grocery stores unnoticed. Oddly enough, she looked happier than the woman who attended military galas. The drive to the Whitcomb estate took just under 40 minutes. As the houses grew larger, Calder became quieter. Finally, he reached across the console. "You okay? I should ask you." He forced another smile. "They'll like you. You sound like you're trying to convince yourself." He looked away. The Whitcomb house appeared around the final curve. It wasn't simply large. It was designed to impress. Stone columns, perfect landscaping. Luxury vehicles lined the circular driveway. Warm, golden light glowed through enormous windows, while Christmas music drifted faintly into the cold evening air. Calder squeezed my hand. "They mean well?" I wasn't sure whether he believed those words. A housekeeper opened the front door before we reached it. Inside, polished marble reflected crystal chandeliers. Everything smelled of pine cinnamon and expensive perfume. Footsteps approached. A beautifully dressed woman emerged from the hallway. Her diamond necklace caught the light before her eyes found mine. She looked me up, then down. She paused on my worn coat. Her smile never reached her eyes. "So," she said pleasantly, "you must be Vivian." "I am." She kissed Calder's cheek without taking her eyes off me. Then she tilted her head slightly. "Well," another slow glance. "Calder told us you were simple." A faint smile spread across her face. He just forgot to mention how simple. The room suddenly felt much colder than the December air outside. For a moment, nobody spoke. Blythe Whitcomb continued smiling as though she'd just paid me a compliment. It was a polished smile, the kind perfected over decades of charity galas, country club dinners, and social events where insults were wrapped in silk and served with champagne. I smiled back. "I've always thought simple was underrated." Her eyebrows lifted slightly. Clearly that wasn't the response she'd expected. "Come in," she said. "Dinner's almost ready." Calder quietly took my coat. "I'll hang this up." "No," I said, gently slipping it over the back of my chair near the entrance instead. "It's fine there. I don't know why I did it. Perhaps some part of me wanted that old coat to remain visible. It represented the woman they believed I was, the woman they were about to judge." We followed Blythe into an enormous dining room decorated like something from a magazine. A towering Christmas tree stood beside floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking snow-covered gardens. Crystal glasses sparkled beneath soft candlelight. Every plate matched perfectly. Even the folded napkins looked rehearsed. A tall man stood beside the fireplace with a glass of red wine. "Calder!" His voice carried authority without needing volume. Father and son shook hands before embracing awkwardly. Then the older man turned toward me. "So this is Vivian?" "It is," Calder answered. The man extended his hand. "Harlan Whitcomb." His grip was firm. His eyes weren't. They evaluated, measured, calculated. "Pleasure to meet you. You as well." His gaze lingered on my clothes for perhaps 1 second longer than politeness allowed. Interesting. Not subtle, simply practiced. A younger woman entered carrying another bottle of wine. She looked remarkably like Calder, except where his face projected warmth, hers projected amusement. So this is her. "Tessa." Calder sighed. "What?" She shrugged innocently. "I've heard about Vivian for nearly 2 years." She hugged her brother before offering me a quick handshake. "I expected someone different." "I get that a lot." "Oh, I've never looked much like people's expectations." She laughed. "I like that answer." But her eyes suggested otherwise. We gathered around the dining table. Blythe insisted I sit across from Harlan. Calder sat beside me. Tessa across from him. Within minutes, servers brought roasted prime rib garlic potatoes, asparagus, homemade rolls, and dishes that probably cost more than some families spent on Christmas dinner. Everything looked beautiful. No one touched their food immediately. Conversation came first. "So," Blythe began pleasantly, "Calder tells us you work for the government." "I do." "What exactly do you do?" "I handle administration." That answer had always been technically true. "I oversee personnel budgets, planning, and organizational operations." "Oh." She nodded slowly. "Administrative work. Mostly." Harlan sipped his wine. "Federal employees have decent pensions." "They do." "You planning to stay until retirement?" "If circumstances allow." "What department?" "I'd rather not say." The table became quiet. Blythe smiled politely. "Oh, I understand." "Confidential." "Something like that." She laughed lightly. "Harlan spent years working with government contracts. I know how people sometimes exaggerate security. I don't exaggerate it." Our eyes met briefly. Neither of us looked away. Calder quickly reached for the bread basket. "Mom makes these from scratch. They smell wonderful." The conversation shifted for all of 30 seconds. Then Tessa leaned forward. "So, do government office jobs pay well?" Calder looked uncomfortable. "Tess, what?" "I'm just curious." I buttered a piece of bread before answering. "I've never measured my career by salary." She smiled. "That's usually what people say when they don't make very much." Silence. I took another bite. The bread really was excellent. Harlan chuckled softly. Tessa could have phrased that better. But she isn't entirely wrong. He folded his napkin carefully. "Marriage isn't only about love. It requires financial compatibility." "I agree." He seemed surprised. "You do?" "Absolutely." "What happens when one person carries all the responsibility?" "I imagine that depends on what kind of responsibility we're discussing." He leaned back. "Financial responsibility." I nodded. "Money matters. But character matters longer." His smile became noticeably thinner. Blythe lifted her wine glass. "So tell us about your family." "My parents both passed away several years ago." "Oh." She softened briefly. "I'm sorry." "Thank you." "Any siblings?" "No." "So it's just you?" "Yes." "No large inheritance?" Calder almost dropped his fork. "Mom." "What?" She looked genuinely confused. "We're having a conversation." I simply asked. I answered before Calder could. "No." "There wasn't." "Everything I have, I've earned. That's admirable." Blythe smiled again. "Although difficult." "Difficult for a woman alone." "I've managed." She tilted her head. "I'm sure you have." Something about that sentence carried more pity than respect. The distinction mattered. The meal continued. Every topic somehow circled back to status. Travel. Investments. Vacation homes. Private schools. Exclusive clubs. I contributed politely whenever appropriate. I never lied. I simply omitted details. When Harlan described his latest golf trip with several senators, I didn't mention I'd briefed one of them 3 weeks earlier. When Blythe admired a diplomatic reception she'd attended in Washington, I didn't mention I'd been seated 20 feet away. When Tessa bragged about attending a charity gala aboard a naval museum ship, I didn't mention I'd given the keynote address. Watching them construct an imaginary version of my life became strangely fascinating. They believed I rented a modest apartment. I owned my home outright. They assumed Calder earned several times my income. In reality, I earned considerably more. Not because I valued that fact, but because they clearly did. Halfway through dinner, Blythe smiled warmly. "So, when are you two thinking about children?" Calder glanced at me. "We've talked about it. I'd like grandchildren while I'm still young enough to enjoy them." I smiled politely. "I understand. And your job would allow that." "It has before." She frowned. "What do you mean?" "I've worked with many parents." "Ah." She misunderstood. Again. Then Harlan placed his knife down with deliberate precision. "I've always believed marriages succeed when expectations are clear." I don't disagree. I've seen too many young couples destroy relationships arguing about money. So have I. Which is why planning matters. His voice had become noticeably more formal. Calder looked down at his plate. He wasn't eating anymore. A warning bell rang quietly inside my mind. Not because of Harlan. Because of Calder. He already knew where this conversation was heading. He wasn't surprised. He was waiting. Blythe dabbed her lips with her napkin. "Harlan's always been very practical. So I've noticed. We believe in protecting family. I respect that." We're delighted Calder found someone kind. She reached across the table and briefly touched my hand. I truly mean that. But kindness alone doesn't build secure futures. Something heavy landed softly on the polished table. A leather folder. Dark blue. Professional. Harlan slowly rotated it toward me. His movements were calm. Almost ceremonial. I hoped we'd have this conversation privately after dinner. He smiled. But perhaps now is better. Calder finally spoke. Dad, it's only paperwork. He looked at me. Vivian, I've had our attorney prepare a straightforward prenuptial agreement. The room became perfectly still. Blythe smiled encouragingly. Tessa took another sip of wine without saying a word. Calder still wouldn't meet my eyes. Harlan rested one hand gently on the folder. If everyone enters marriage honestly, then signing this should be easy. He slowly pushed the folder across the polished table until it stopped directly in front of me. I'd appreciate it, he said evenly, if you would sign it tonight. The only sound in the room was the faint crackling of the fireplace behind him. I lowered my eyes to the unopened folder. Then I looked at Calder. He finally raised his head. There was apology in his expression. But there was something else too. Resignation. As though this had been decided long before Christmas dinner. Long before I ever walked through the front door wearing my oldest coat. I didn't touch the folder immediately. Instead, I reached for my water glass and took a slow sip. 23 years in uniform had taught me something invaluable. The person who rushes to react usually gives away the advantage. The person who stays calm learns everything. Across the table, Harlan watched me over folded hands. Blythe smiled with patient confidence as though she had already rehearsed this moment dozens of times. Tessa looked openly entertained. Only Calder appeared miserable. He stared at the tablecloth instead of at me. That hurt more than anything his parents had said. Finally, I rested my fingertips on the leather folder. This was prepared before tonight, Harlan nodded. Several weeks ago. Several weeks? The words echoed quietly inside me. Calder had proposed 6 months earlier. He'd known about this for weeks. Yet he'd never mentioned it. Not once. I see. Blythe leaned forward. Please don't misunderstand. We simply believe financial matters should always be discussed before marriage. I actually agree. All three of them looked relieved. That interested me. Perhaps they had expected anger. Instead, I slowly opened the folder. The first page carried the logo of a prestigious Washington law firm. Professional. Expensive. Very thorough. I turned the first page. Then another. My expression never changed. Inside, every paragraph had been carefully written to protect exactly one person. Calder Whitcomb. The agreement stated that every asset Calder currently owned would remain exclusively his. Reasonable. Then it continued. Every future investment made during the marriage would remain under his sole ownership unless documented otherwise. Interesting. Further down, another clause declared that any real estate purchased after the wedding using Calder's financial resources or jointly acquired through trusts established by the Whitcomb family would never become marital property. Still manageable. Then I reached the next section. My eyes paused for the first time. If the marriage ended, I would waive any claim to spousal support, any retirement benefits, any jointly accumulated investments. Even personal gifts exceeding a specified value could be reclaimed under certain circumstances. I quietly turned another page. The language became colder. If Calder became seriously ill, medical decisions would be transferred first to his parents. Not his wife, his parents. If he passed away, his family trust would bypass me entirely. Everything would return to the Whitcomb family. I kept reading. One sentence almost made me laugh. The agreement described me as the economically dependent spouse. Economically dependent. I read the phrase twice, not because it offended me, because it was astonishing. My annual military salary alone exceeded every assumption they had made about me. Not counting housing, not counting retirement, not counting years of carefully managed investments. But none of that mattered. What mattered was what they'd believed. They truly thought I needed Calder. They truly believed they were protecting him from me. I closed the folder gently. Nobody spoke. Finally, Harlan broke the silence. Our attorney specializes in protecting multi-generational family assets. I'm sure he does. You understand why that's important. I understand why you believe it's important. His forehead tightened almost imperceptibly. Believe? I said what I meant. Blythe offered another polished smile. We've seen women marry for less. I'm sure you have. This isn't personal. I looked at her calmly. It became personal the moment you assumed my character. For the first time that evening, Blythe's smile faded. Only slightly. Enough to notice. Harlan folded his hands. Let's speak plainly. I prefer that. Our family has spent decades building stability. I respect that. My responsibility is ensuring my son never loses what generations created. And my responsibility, I replied quietly, is understanding exactly what kind of family I'm marrying into. The words lingered. Calder shifted uncomfortably. Viv, I turned toward him. When were you planning to tell me? He hesitated. I knew Dad wanted one. Wanted one. I didn't know every detail. I held up the folder. You knew this existed? Yes. You knew tonight would happen. Silence. I hoped it would go smoothly. Something inside me became very still. Not anger. Disappointment. There's a difference. Anger burns. Disappointment simply removes hope. Tessa broke the silence with a nervous laugh. I think everyone's making this bigger than it is. She shrugged. Honestly, if I were marrying someone wealthier than me, I'd expect paperwork too. I smiled politely. Would you? Of course. I'd sign immediately. Interesting. She mistook my calmness for surrender. Most people did. Harlan pushed a silver pen toward me. I appreciate maturity. I've always believed reasonable people solve problems efficiently. I picked up the pen. Across the table, Blythe visibly relaxed. Calder looked relieved. Even Tessa smiled. None of them noticed I hadn't opened the signature page. Instead, I continued reading. Near the end sat a section titled, Conduct and Reputation. My eyes narrowed. According to the agreement, I would agree never to engage in any activity that could embarrass the Whitcomb family socially, professionally, or financially. I would avoid public behavior considered inconsistent with the family's reputation. Any violation could trigger financial penalties. I looked up slowly. What exactly qualifies as embarrassing? Harlan answered immediately. Public scandals. Poor judgment. Inappropriate associations. I nodded thoughtfully. And who decides? Our attorney would interpret the agreement if necessary. So, I could spend 20 years supporting Calder. And someone else decides whether I behaved appropriately. His smile remained perfectly controlled. The language is standard. No, it isn't. He blinked. I've reviewed enough legal documents in my life to know that. Blythe folded her napkin. We're only asking you to prove your intentions. I looked directly at her. My intentions? Yes, that I love our son. And this document proves that it protects him. I closed the folder again. I noticed something missing. Harlan frowned. What? A clause protecting me. Nobody answered. Because there wasn't one. Everything inside those 43 pages assumed only one possibility. That I could harm Calder, not the other way around. I turned toward him again. Did you read all of it? He looked embarrassed. I skimmed it. You skimmed the legal agreement governing the rest of our lives. I trusted Dad. Those 4 words settled heavily between us. I trusted Dad. Not. I trusted us. Not. I wanted us to decide together. Just, I trusted Dad. Outside, snow drifted quietly past enormous windows. Christmas music floated faintly from another room. Somewhere, children laughed in a neighboring house. For a strange moment, I wished I were anywhere else. Not because the Whitcombs had insulted me, because I suddenly understood Calder far better than I ever had. He wasn't cruel. He wasn't greedy. He simply had never learned how to stand between the woman he loved and the family that controlled him. That realization hurt far more than any contract ever could. Harlan gently tapped the signature page. If you'd like, we can finalize this before dessert. His confidence was remarkable. He genuinely believed the evening was ending exactly as he'd planned. I looked down at the signature line, then at the pen still resting in my hand. Without speaking, I uncapped it. Across the table, Blythe exchanged a satisfied glance with her husband. Tessa smiled openly now. Even Calder exhaled. They all thought I'd accepted their conditions. Slowly. Very slowly. I lowered the pen toward the paper. At that exact moment, my phone vibrated inside my handbag. Once, twice, then again. The distinctive encrypted ringtone echoed softly through the silent dining room. Every eye turned toward me. I apologized politely. I'm sorry. I need to see who that is. Blythe gave a tiny disapproving smile. On Christmas, I wasn't expecting any calls. I reached into my bag. The secure government phone illuminated my hand. Across the screen flashed 5 words that instantly changed my expression. Pentagon Secure Line, Priority 1. For the first time all evening, I didn't look at the contract. I looked at the phone, then quietly stood. I stood slowly, not because I needed the extra second, but because everyone at that table did. The room had changed. A moment earlier I had been the quiet woman in the worn coat holding a pen over a contract designed to erase me. Now the small black phone in my hand had pulled every eye toward it, as if it were a weapon placed on the dinner table. Blythe's smile tightened. "Is that necessary right now?" I looked at her calmly. "Yes." Harlan's gaze moved from the phone to my face. For the first time that evening, I saw uncertainty. Not fear yet, just the faint irritation of a man whose schedule had been interrupted by something he did not control. Calder stood halfway. "Viv, do you need—" "No," I said softly. "Stay there." The words were not harsh. That was why they worked. I stepped away from the table and moved toward the tall windows at the far end of the dining room. Outside, snow gathered on the hedges and stone steps. The Whitcomb estate looked peaceful from that angle, almost gentle, as though cruelty could be hidden by good lighting and expensive garland. I answered the call. "Marlowe." The voice on the other end was clipped, familiar and urgent. "Admiral Marlowe, this is Captain Rains. Sorry to interrupt your evening, ma'am. The secretary is waiting for your confirmation on the revised deployment brief." Behind me, silverware shifted. Very slightly. Not enough to be accidental. I kept my eyes on the snow. "Understood, Captain. Give me the summary." "Yes, ma'am. The Pacific Fleet recommendations were accepted with 2 modifications. The Joint Command wants your approval before the secure packet goes forward." I heard Harlan's chair creak. Blythe whispered something. Tessa didn't laugh. I lowered my voice, not because I needed privacy anymore, but because habit demanded it. "Read the modifications," Captain Rains continued. He mentioned names, time zones, operational windows, and a meeting with the Deputy Secretary before morning. Most of it would mean nothing to the people behind me, but a few words carried enough weight to break through even civilian denial. "Admiral, Secretary, Pentagon, Secure Packet, Joint Command." I approved the first modification. I rejected the second and gave a reason concise enough to be repeated word for word. Captain Rains acknowledged it immediately. "Yes, ma'am. The aircraft will be ready at 600 if you need to return. Hold it as standby only. I'll confirm within the hour." "Yes, Admiral." I ended the call. For several seconds I remained facing the window. My reflection stared back at me, plain sweater, old coat, visible behind me near the foyer, simple earrings, calm expression. Nothing about me had changed, only what they knew. When I turned around, the dining room looked like a stage after the lights had failed. Blythe sat perfectly still, one hand resting on her napkin. Her face had gone pale beneath her careful makeup. Tessa's wine glass hovered halfway between the table and her mouth. Harlan was standing now. Calder looked as if someone had taken the floor out from under him. I returned to my seat and placed the phone beside the contract. Not on top of it. Beside it. The contrast felt important. Harlan cleared his throat. "Admiral." He stopped as though the word tasted unfamiliar. "As in Navy Admiral?" I met his eyes. "Yes." No one moved. Then Blythe gave a small laugh. It was brittle, almost frightened. "I'm sorry, I must have misunderstood. Calder said you worked in administration." "I do." Tessa blinked. "For the Navy?" "Yes." Harlan's expression sharpened. He was recalculating quickly. Men like Harlan did not stay stunned for long. Their instinct was to recover control. "What rank exactly?" Calder whispered Dad. But Harlan ignored him. I answered because I wanted every assumption in that room to die cleanly. "Rear Admiral?" Blythe's lips parted. Tessa set her glass down too hard. A thin red line of wine slid along the rim and onto the white tablecloth. Calder stared at me. "Vivian!" There was hurt in his voice. Not outrage, not accusation. Hurt. That surprised me. "You never told me." "No," I said, "I didn't." "Why?" I looked at the folder between us. "Because I wanted to know how you loved me before knowing what came with my name." The words landed heavily. He looked away first. Harlan forced a smile. "Well, this is certainly unexpected. I imagine so. Had we known that I outranked your assumptions?" His jaw tightened. I let the silence breathe. Blythe quickly leaned forward. "Vivienne, surely you understand this was all a misunderstanding." "No," I said, "it was not." Her hand trembled slightly as she reached for her water. "We were only trying to protect our son. You tried to protect him from a woman you believed had no money, no family, no influence, and no power. That's not fair. It's exact." Tessa shifted in her chair. "Okay, but you have to admit you were hiding a pretty big thing." I turned to her. "I hid my rank. You revealed your character." Her mouth closed. Calder rubbed both hands over his face. I didn't know you were an admiral. I know. I knew your work mattered. I knew you traveled. I knew you were private, but... His voice broke off. But you didn't ask. He looked up. I thought you'd tell me when you were ready. That part I respected. His eyes filled with hope too quickly. So I continued. What I don't respect is that you let me walk into this house knowing they had prepared that contract. The hope disappeared. He swallowed. I thought it was just a prenup. You thought asking me to sign away my dignity over Christmas dinner was just a prenup. I didn't know they would do it like this. But you knew they would do something. He had no answer. That was answer enough. Harlan stepped back into the conversation, his voice warmer now, almost charming. Admiral Marlowe, I owe you an apology. The sudden use of my title did not escape me. I misjudged the situation. No, Mr. Whitcomb. You judged it exactly the way you wanted to when you thought I was ordinary. His face reddened. Blythe tried again. We would never intentionally disrespect someone of your position. There it was. The sentence that ended everything. I looked at her for a long moment. Someone of my position. She realized too late what she had said. I picked up the contract and turned it back toward them. You didn't owe respect to an admiral tonight. My voice remained quiet. You owed it to the woman your son planned to marry. The fireplace cracked softly behind Harlan. Outside, the snow kept falling. Inside, nobody had anywhere left to hide. For a long moment, the only thing moving in that dining room was the thin, red stain spreading across the white tablecloth from Tessa's spilled wine. No one reached for it. No one called the housekeeper. That small stain became the first honest thing I had seen in the Whitcomb home all evening. It was ugly visible and impossible to pretend away. Harlan recovered first. Men like him always did. His shoulders squared, his voice softened, his face rearranged itself into something almost fatherly. Vivienne, he said carefully, dropping my title. Now I can see how this must have felt. I looked at him. No, you can't. His mouth tightened, but only for a second. We handled this poorly. You handled it exactly the way you intended. Blythe pressed one hand to her chest. That is unfair. I turned toward her. You looked at my coat before you looked at my face. Her eyes flickered toward the foyer where that old navy coat still hung over the chair like silent evidence. You mocked me before I sat down. I was making conversation. No, you were establishing rank. The word made her flinch. Tessa gave a nervous laugh, but it died quickly when no one joined her. Calder still hadn't spoken. That hurt most. Not because I needed him to defend me anymore. That moment had passed. But some part of me still wanted to see him become the man he had promised to be beside the Chesapeake Bay. I turned to him. When did they first mention the contract? He swallowed. About a month ago. A month. I nodded once. And what did you say? I told them it was unnecessary. But you didn't stop it. I tried. No, Calder. Trying is what you do before the woman you love is sitting at your parents' table with a pen in her hand. His face folded with shame. I didn't know how to stand up to them. There it was. Not an excuse. The truth. It was almost enough to make me sadder than angry. Harlan stepped closer to the table. Calder has always respected this family. Respect is not obedience, I said. Blythe's voice sharpened. We gave him everything, and taught him he could lose it if he disappointed you. Calder looked down. That confirmed more than words could have. I picked up the contract again. 43 pages of polished fear, expensive suspicion, and social cruelty. Then I set it down gently. I came here tonight hoping to meet my future family. Blythe whispered, You still can. No. The word was quiet. Final. Calder looked up quickly. Viv. I removed the engagement ring from my finger. It was harder than I expected. The ring caught slightly at my knuckle, and for one foolish second I remembered the day he gave it to me. His hands had trembled, his voice had cracked. I had believed that tenderness meant courage. I had been wrong. I placed the ring on top of the contract. Calder stared at it like I had set down something alive. You don't fail a test like this because I'm an admiral, I said. You fail it because you thought I wasn't. Blythe began to cry then. Softly, elegantly, almost strategically. Please don't destroy my son over one dinner. I stood. One dinner did not create this, it revealed it. Harlan's face hardened. You're making an emotional decision. I smiled faintly. No, Mr. Whitcomb. Emotional decisions are loud. This one is very calm. Tessa folded her arms. So that's it, you just walk away. I looked at her. Yes. Must be nice to have that kind of power. I reached for my old coat. No, Tessa, it's not power, it's self-respect. Calder pushed back his chair and followed me toward the entrance hall. Vivian, please, just give me 5 minutes. I stopped near the front door. The house behind him glowed with Christmas warmth, but all I could feel was the cold marble under my shoes. What would you do with 5 minutes? Apologize. For what? He opened his mouth. Closed it. I waited. He looked toward the dining room, then back at me. For not protecting you. That was close. But not enough. And, his eyes reddened, for letting them believe you were beneath us. I nodded. And, he exhaled shakily, for believing part of it myself. There it was. The first real sentence he had spoken all night. It arrived too late, but at least it arrived. I touched his cheek once gently. I loved you, Calder. His face crumpled. Loved. Yes. He closed his eyes. I can fix this. No, you can face it. That's different. I opened the door. Cold air rushed into the foyer, sharp and clean. Snow moved through the porch light in soft white sheets. Behind Calder, Blythe appeared in the hallway. Admiral Marlowe, she said, voice trembling now. Please, we can start over. I looked at her carefully. Would you have said that if the phone hadn't rung? She had no answer. None of them did. So I stepped outside. Calder followed me onto the porch without a coat. Vivienne. I turned one last time. He looked younger in that moment. Not 43, not successful, not engaged. Just a man standing between the life he wanted and the family he feared. I don't need a husband who worships my rank, I said. I need one who respects me when he thinks I have none. The words struck him quietly. He didn't argue again. As I walked down the steps, my old boots left clean marks in the fresh snow. Behind me, the Whitcomb house remained bright and beautiful. But now I knew what lived inside it. And I would never again confuse elegance with honor. For 3 weeks after Christmas, Calder called every day. At first I didn't answer. Not because I wanted to punish him, but because I knew the sound of his voice would pull me toward the softest parts of myself. And soft does not always mean wise. I returned to work before sunrise the next morning. By 6 o'clock I was in uniform, standing inside a secure conference room, while snow melted from the shoulders of officers arriving from 3 different bases. The Pacific briefing lasted nearly 4 hours. People came in with folders, tablets, questions, objections, and revised recommendations. Nobody asked about my Christmas dinner. Nobody cared about my old coat. Nobody looked at me like I needed to prove my worth. They simply expected me to lead, so I did. That was the strange mercy of duty. It did not ask whether your heart hurt. It only asked whether you could still stand straight. And I could. A week later, a letter arrived from Calder. Not a text, not a voicemail. A letter written by hand on plain white paper. He admitted everything. He said he had spent his whole life confusing peace with obedience. He said he had loved me, but he had also enjoyed believing I was simple, because it made him feel safe from his family's judgment. He wrote that when his father slid that contract across the table, he saw my face and still said nothing. Still said, that line made me close my eyes. At least he finally understood the real wound. Not the contract. Not the insult. The silence. He asked if we could talk someday, not to restart the engagement, but so he could apologize without trying to win anything back. I placed the letter in a drawer. Then I left it there. In the weeks that followed, the Whitcomb name became uncomfortable in certain rooms. Harlan had apparently told several friends he was protecting Calder from an ordinary woman with no assets. By New Year's, the same people learned that the woman in question was a Navy admiral. That kind of story travels fast. I did nothing to help it spread. I didn't need to. Truth has its own engine once pride lights the match. One afternoon I received a note from Blythe. It was brief, formal, and badly disguised as grace. She said she regretted the miscommunication and hoped I understood that a mother's love could make her overly cautious. I did not reply. Miscommunication is when someone misunderstands your words. What happened in that dining room was not miscommunication. It was revelation. By February, I finally agreed to meet Calder at a quiet coffee shop near the water. He arrived early. No suit, no polished performance, just a tired man with red eyes and both hands wrapped around a paper cup. When I sat across from him, he didn't reach for me. That mattered. I'm sorry, he said. I nodded. I know. I don't expect forgiveness. That's good. A sad smile crossed his face. I deserved that. We sat quietly for a while, watching gray water move beneath the winter sky. Then he said, I keep thinking about what you said, that I failed because I thought you weren't powerful. No, I said gently. You failed because you let love become conditional in the room where I needed it most. His eyes filled, but he didn't look away. I'm working on that. I hope you are. For myself, not to get you back. That was the first thing he said that gave me real peace. I believed him. And still I did not go back. Some doors close without hatred. They close because the room behind them can no longer hold who you've become. Spring came slowly that year. The snow melted from the naval yards. The Chesapeake turned silver under morning light. I resumed my ordinary life, though ordinary had always been a relative term. One April afternoon, after speaking to a group of young officers, a girl no older than 22 approached me. She wore her uniform like it still felt new, her shoulders stiff with ambition and fear. Admiral Marlowe. Yes, my mother says women like us have to prove ourselves twice. I studied her face. Your mother is wrong. She blinked. I smiled. We usually have to prove ourselves 10 times, but don't let that make you bitter. Let it make you accurate. She laughed nervously. Then she asked, how do you know who really respects you? I thought of Calder, of Blythe's diamond necklace, of Harlan's contract, of my old coat hanging like a witness in that marble hallway. You watch how they treat you when they think you can do nothing for them, I said. Her expression changed as if I had handed her something she might need years later. That evening I stood alone on the pier outside the academy. The wind was cold but not cruel. I watched the lights shimmer across the water and thought about all the versions of ourselves we carry. The woman in uniform, the woman in the old coat, the woman at the table, the woman who walked away. They were all me, and none of them needed permission to be worthy. Some people only respect power after they recognize it. But real character is how they treat you before they know your name. If this story touched something in you, I'd love to know where you're watching from and what you would have done at that dinner table. Share your thoughts below, and if you enjoy stories about dignity, family, betrayal, and the quiet strength it takes to walk away, subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Thank you for staying with Vivian's story until the end.